The moment arrived sooner than I expected. Eleanor took the stage, microphone in hand, smiling brightly as she welcomed everyone to the Willow Creek Summer Festival. Her voice was warm and inviting, the kind that could charm a crowd without breaking a sweat. She thanked the organizers, praised the neighborhood's spirit of unity, and joked about how perfect our little community was. The audience clapped politely, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I stood near the back of the crowd, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. In my pocket, I clutched a USB drive containing all the evidence we'd gathered. The letters, the photos, the videos, even transcripts of conversations. Beside me, Greg gave me an encouraging nod, while Sarah whispered, "You've got this." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was it. There was no turning back now. Eleanor's speech droned on, but just as she began introducing the next performer, Greg stepped forward, clearing his throat loudly. He held up a hand, signaling for attention, and grabbed the spare microphone from the sound booth. The music cut off abruptly, leaving an awkward silence as heads turned toward him. "Before we continue," Greg said, his voice firm and clear, "there's something you all need to hear." Eleanor froze, her smile faltering for the briefest moment before snapping back into place. "Greg, darling," she said sweetly, though her eyes narrowed slightly, "this really isn't the time." "It's exactly the right time," I interrupted, stepping forward. My voice trembled at first, but I forced myself to keep going. "We've been quiet for too long, letting fear dictate how we live in our own homes. But today, that changes." One by one, my neighbors spoke up, sharing their stories with raw honesty. Mrs. Henderson recounted how Eleanor bullied her into resigning from the HOA board years ago. Mr. Paddle described the humiliation he felt when fined for celebrating Diwali with traditional decorations. Others chimed in, each tale more infuriating than the last. Gasps rippled through the crowd as photos of ridiculous violations flashed on a projector screen set up nearby. Fines for mismatched planters, warnings about curtains that were too bold, absurd penalties for minor infractions. Eleanor tried to regain control, shouting over us, but her protests fell flat. People weren't listening anymore. They were watching, wide-eyed, as the truth unraveled before them. When I played the video of her son attempting to break into my house, the murmurs turned into outright outrage. Someone shouted, "Is this really who's running our neighborhood?" Her composure shattered completely. She stumbled backward, stammering denials and accusations, but no one believed her. By the end of it, the once idyllic festival had transformed into something else entirely, a reckoning. Neighbors turned to each other, whispering furiously, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding in agreement. Even those who had avoided me before approached cautiously, offering apologies and thanks. As the crowd dispersed, Eleanor stormed off the stage, her face pale and her hands clenched into fists. Her son appeared moments later, looking guilty and defeated. Together, they disappeared into the chaos, swallowed by the very people they tried to control. That night, I sat on my porch, exhausted but relieved. David joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "You did good today," he said softly. "Really good." I smiled faintly, staring out at the quiet street. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But I also knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time, I believed it was possible. And that made all the difference. When I finally got the keys to my dream house, it felt like all my hard work had paid off. Every late night at the office, every skipped vacation, and every sacrifice. It was worth it for this place. Nestled in the quiet suburbs of Willow Creek, the house was everything I'd ever wanted. There was a cozy front porch with a swing where I could sit and sip coffee on lazy mornings. Inside, the open-concept kitchen gleamed with marble countertops, perfect for cooking family dinners or hosting friends. And then there was the backyard, a big open space where I imagined planting flowers, setting up a grill, and maybe even adding a little vegetable garden. The day I signed the papers, I couldn't stop smiling. The real estate agent handed me the shiny new keys with such enthusiasm, like she knew exactly how much this moment meant to me. "Welcome home," she said warmly, her voice practically glowing with excitement. But tucked into the same envelope as the keys was something else, a thick packet labeled Willow Creek Homeowners Association Guidelines. At first glance, it looked harmless enough, just a bunch of rules about keeping the neighborhood looking nice. Things like mailbox colors, lawn maintenance, and holiday decorations. At the time, I didn't think too much about it. I flipped through the pages quickly while sitting at the closing table, skimming over phrases like approved exterior paint palettes and landscaping restrictions. To be honest, my mind was somewhere else, imagining weekends spent lounging in the backyard, decorating the living room for Christmas, and making this house truly feel like mine. Who cared about mailbox colors when you were holding the keys to your future? Surely, these rules wouldn't affect me that much. They were probably just suggestions anyway, right? But as fate would have it, those guidelines weren't just friendly reminders. They were the beginning of something far more complicated than I could have ever imagined. Little did I know, moving into Willow Creek wasn't just about finding a beautiful home. It was about stepping into a world governed by strict rules and people who took those rules very seriously. The first few weeks in the house were magical. Everything was fresh and new, and I spent hours exploring every corner, imagining how I'd make each room reflect my personality. I bought plants for the windowsills, hung photos on the walls, and even started planning a small herb garden for the backyard. It felt like I was building not just a house but a life, a peaceful, happy life. But peace has a funny way of slipping away when you least expect it. One Saturday morning, as I sat on the porch sipping tea and enjoying the quiet, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, I was greeted by Eleanor Whitmore, the president of the HOA. She introduced herself with a warm smile, complimenting my choice of paint color for the front door and saying how thrilled she was to welcome me to the neighborhood. Then, without missing a beat, she made a request that stopped me cold. "Jessica," she said sweetly, leaning in slightly as if sharing a secret, "my son has just moved back to town, and he's renting the house next door temporarily. Would you mind providing him with a copy of your key, just in case of emergencies?" I stared at her, stunned. A copy of my key? For someone I didn't even know. My stomach twisted into knots as I tried to process what she was asking. Wasn't that invasive? Unsafe even? I forced a polite smile and shook my head. "I'm sorry," I said firmly, "but I don't feel comfortable giving out copies of my key." Eleanor's smile faltered for a split second before snapping back into place. "Well," she replied, her tone still cheerful, but with an edge I couldn't quite place, "we'll see how things go." And with that, she turned and walked down my driveway, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling in my chest. As I closed the door, I couldn't shake the thought that I'd just stepped onto a path I hadn't anticipated, one that might lead to trouble. The days that followed Eleanor's visit were quiet, almost too quiet. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe her request wasn't as strange as it seemed. After all, people in neighborhoods often looked out for each other, right? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. Something about the way she'd asked, her overly sweet tone, the casual mention of emergencies, felt off. It was like she was testing me, seeing how far I'd been before breaking. Then small things started happening around my house. One morning, I found my garbage cans scattered across the driveway, their lids tossed aside like they'd been rifled through. The night before, I'd made sure to secure them tightly. I was certain of it. Was this some kind of prank, or was someone trying to send a message? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I cleaned up the mess and chalked it up to raccoons or stray dogs. A few days later, my garden hose went missing. It wasn't anything fancy, just a basic green hose coiled neatly against the side of the house. When I noticed it was gone, I searched everywhere, under bushes, behind the shed, even inside the garage, but it was nowhere to be found. This time, I couldn't ignore the unease creeping into my mind. Coincidence? Maybe. But deep down, I suspected otherwise. When I mentioned these incidents to David, he brushed them off. "It's probably nothing," he said with a shrug, scrolling through his phone. "Kids messing around, maybe. Don't let it get to you." But it was getting to me. Every creak of the floorboards at night made me jolt awake. Every shadow outside my window felt suspicious. I started second-guessing every decision I made around the house. Did leaving the porch light on make me look paranoid? Would locking the gate seem too defensive? I hated feeling this way in my own home, a place that was supposed to bring me peace, not anxiety. And then came the letter. An official notice from the HOA, delivered in a crisp white envelope, slipped under my door. My heart sank as I opened it and read the contents. It was a formal reminder about their earlier request for a duplicate key, couched in polite language but laced with thinly veiled threats. For the safety and security of our community, it read, "Residents are required to provide access to trusted neighbors in case of emergencies." Below that was a list of penalties for noncompliance, escalating fines, potential legal action, and even hints at foreclosure if I continued to resist. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling slightly. Foreclosure? Over a set of keys. It sounded absurd, yet there it was, written in black and white. Suddenly, Eleanor's smile during our conversation replayed in my mind, and I realized what this really was. A power play. She hadn't been asking nicely because she cared about my safety. She'd been laying the groundwork for something bigger, something calculated. That evening, I called David into the kitchen and showed him the letter. He frowned as he read it, his brow furrowing. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "They can't force you to give out your keys. That's private property." "I know," I snapped, more frustrated than scared. "But why does it feel like they're trying to intimidate me?" David didn't have an answer, and neither did I. All I knew was that this situation was spiraling out of control faster than I could handle. What had started as a seemingly harmless request now felt like a full-blown invasion of my privacy. And worse, I didn't know who to trust. Were my neighbors watching me, reporting back to Eleanor? Had someone tampered with my garbage cans and stolen my hose on purpose? Or was I letting paranoia get the better of me? As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I replayed the events in my head. Eleanor's sugary sweet voice echoed in my ears, and I couldn't shake the image of her standing on my porch, smiling like she already knew she'd win. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt trapped, not by walls or locks, but by invisible forces closing in around me. The worst part was knowing I couldn't ignore this anymore. If I gave in and handed over a key, I'd be giving up more than just access to my home. I'd be surrendering my autonomy, letting someone else dictate how I lived my life. But if I refused, what would happen next? Would they escalate further? Would the strange occurrences around my house grow more frequent or more dangerous? By the time sleep finally claimed me, one thing was clear. I was caught in a game I hadn't agreed to play, and the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. The tension in my house was palpable. Every morning, I woke up dreading what new challenge the day might bring. The HOA's letter sat on my kitchen counter, a constant reminder of the pressure mounting around me. I couldn't focus on anything else. Work emails piled up unread, dinner plans were forgotten, and even David noticed how distracted I'd become. "You're letting this get to you too much," he said one evening as I paced the living room, clutching the letter like it might bite me. But how could I not? This wasn't just about keys anymore. It felt like my entire sense of security was slipping away. One night, after another restless hour of tossing and turning, I decided I needed answers. If Eleanor thought she could intimidate me into compliance, she had another thing coming. Early the next morning, I marched over to her house, determined to confront her face to face. Her home was exactly what you'd expect from someone like her. Immaculate landscaping, a freshly painted front door, and a welcome mat that seemed more decorative than functional. As I rang the doorbell, I braced myself for whatever came next. Eleanor answered the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jessica," she exclaimed, feigning surprise. "What a pleasant surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I think we both know why I'm here," I replied, holding up the letter. My voice trembled slightly, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This is ridiculous, Eleanor. You can't demand access to my house. It's not safe, and frankly, it's none of your business." Her expression shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of irritation crossing her face before she smoothed it back into her practiced smile. "Oh dear, I understand your concerns," she said, leaning casually against the doorway. "But these measures are for everyone's protection. We want to ensure that all residents feel secure. Surely, you see the importance of that." "No, I don't," I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "I bought this house because I wanted a place where I could feel safe, not so someone else could dictate how I live my life. Your son doesn't need a key to my house. He doesn't even live here permanently." For a moment, Eleanor's mask slipped entirely. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Jessica," she said quietly, her tone icy. "Willow Creek is a wonderful community, but it requires cooperation. Those who refuse to follow the rules, well, let's just say they don't tend to stay long." The threat hung in the air between us, unspoken yet unmistakable. My stomach churned, but I refused to back down. "Is that supposed to scare me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because it's not going to work." Eleanor straightened, her smile returning like a snake coiling to strike. "Scare you? Of course not. I'm simply reminding you of your responsibilities as a homeowner. The choice is yours, Jessica. Cooperate or face the consequences." With that, she closed the door, leaving me standing there, heart pounding and hands clenched into fists. I walked back home in a haze, replaying our conversation over and over in my mind. Was she bluffing? Or did she really have the power to make my life unbearable? That night, I called my best friend, Sarah, hoping for some perspective. After explaining everything, the strange incidents, the letters, the confrontation, she listened silently for a moment before speaking. "Jess, you need to document everything," she advised firmly. "Take pictures of anything suspicious, save copies of the letters, write down every interaction. You'll need proof if things escalate." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. I couldn't afford to be naive anymore. From that point on, I started keeping detailed notes of everything. When I found a rock wedged under my back gate the next day, I snapped photos before removing it. When my mailbox was vandalized later that week, I filed a report with the local authorities and attached pictures of the damage. Each incident fueled my resolve, pushing me further away from fear and closer to defiance. But as the days passed, I began to notice something unsettling. Whispers among my neighbors. Some avoided eye contact when I waved hello, while others exchanged knowing glances behind my back. Were they talking about me? Had Eleanor turned them against me? The isolation gnawed at me, making me question whether standing my ground was worth the cost. Still, I clung to one truth. My home was mine. No amount of intimidation or manipulation would change that. And if Eleanor thought she could break me, she was wrong. What I didn't realize then was that the real battle was only beginning, and it would test me in ways I never expected. The pressure kept building, like a storm cloud refusing to break. Every day felt heavier than the last, and I could feel Eleanor's presence everywhere, even when she wasn't physically around. It was as if her shadow loomed over my house, creeping into every corner of my life. The HOA sent another letter, this time stamped with bold red letters. Fine ALWARNANG. My stomach churned as I read it. They weren't just asking anymore, they were demanding. And beneath their polite language lay a clear message: comply or face the consequences. I tried to distract myself by focusing on normal things: cooking dinner, watering the plants, organizing the pantry, but nothing worked. Even mundane tasks felt tainted now, overshadowed by the growing tension. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table staring blankly at the latest letter, David finally snapped. "You can't keep letting this eat at you," he said firmly, slamming his coffee mug onto the counter. "We need to do something." "Like what?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Call them out. Fight back. You saw how that went with Eleanor. She doesn't care about reason or fairness." David hesitated, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, we both sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "Maybe we need help. Someone who knows how to handle stuff like this." He was right, of course. As much as I wanted to believe I could fight this alone, I knew I couldn't. The next morning, I called Sarah again, and she gave me the name of a lawyer friend who specialized in property disputes. By the end of the week, I was sitting across from him in a small, cluttered office, spilling out everything that had happened. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, listened patiently, nodding occasionally as I recounted the bizarre requests, the escalating threats, and the strange incidents around my house. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. "This isn't just about keys," he said thoughtfully. "It sounds like intimidation tactics, possibly even harassment. But here's the thing. You're not powerless. Document everything, no matter how small. If they escalate further, we'll have grounds to push back legally." His words gave me a flicker of hope, but they also came with a warning. Things might get worse before they got better. "They won't take kindly to resistance," he added, "but standing your ground is the only way to protect yourself and your home." Armed with his advice, I returned to Willow Creek more determined than ever. Over the next few days, I installed hidden cameras around my property, on the porch, near the gate, and along the side of the house. I didn't tell anyone, not even David, because I didn't want to risk tipping off whoever might be watching. At night, I reviewed the footage obsessively, searching for anything unusual. For a while, nothing happened. The neighborhood seemed eerily quiet, almost too perfect. Then, one evening, I caught something on camera, a figure lurking near my front door. My heart raced as I zoomed in on the grainy image. It was late, well past midnight, and the person was wearing a hoodie pulled low over their face. They fiddled with the lock for a moment before giving up and slipping away into the shadows. I recognized the build instantly, Eleanor's son. My hands trembled as I saved the footage and backed it up on multiple devices. This was proof, not just of trespassing, but of intent. They weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were testing my defenses, seeing how far they could push before I broke. The next day, I contacted the police. An officer arrived within the hour, reviewing the video with a grave expression. "This is serious," he said, jotting notes in his pad. "If they try anything else, call us immediately. We'll handle it discreetly, but you should also consider reaching out to your neighbors. You're not the only one affected by the HOA's behavior." His words stuck with me long after he left. That evening, I walked around the block, knocking on doors and introducing myself to people I hadn't spoken to before. Some were hesitant at first, glancing nervously toward Eleanor's house, but others opened up quickly, sharing stories of fines, threats, and inexplicable rules that made no sense. One neighbor confessed she'd been forced to repaint her front door 3 times because it didn't meet the HOA's approved palette. Another showed me a stack of letters threatening foreclosure if he didn't remove his children's swing set from the backyard. By the time I returned home, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, relief, and a growing sense of solidarity. Eleanor had isolated me, yes, but she'd done the same to everyone else. Together, we were stronger, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could fight back. The plan came together slowly, carefully. After speaking with my neighbors, I realized that many of us were dealing with the same frustrations, but we'd all been too afraid to speak up individually. There was strength in numbers, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. We decided to meet secretly, away from prying eyes, in a quiet park on the edge of Willow Creek. It was Sarah's idea. She said it would be less suspicious than gathering in someone's house. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grass, a small group of us gathered under the pretense of a casual picnic. There was Greg, whose dog had been banned because its bark disrupted neighborhood harmony. There was Mrs. Henderson, who'd been fined repeatedly for planting tomatoes in her front yard. Apparently, vegetables weren't aesthetically pleasing. And then there was Mr. Patel, whose colorful string lights during Diwali celebrations earned him a stern warning about holiday decor restrictions. We sat in a circle, passing around snacks and sharing stories. At first, the conversation was hesitant, everyone tiptoeing around the subject of Eleanor and the HOA. But once one person opened up, the floodgates burst. The more we talked, the angrier and more united we became. "This isn't about rules anymore," Greg said firmly, his voice rising above the others. "It's about control. They're trying to dictate every little thing we do. And if we don't push back, they'll keep pushing until none of us have any freedom left." I nodded, clutching a notebook filled with notes and ideas. "We need proof," I said. "Something concrete to show what's really going on here. That way, when we go public, no one can deny it." Everyone agreed. Over the next few days, we worked together, pooling our resources and evidence. Some neighbors dug up old letters and emails from the HOA, documenting years of petty grievances and unreasonable demands. Others took photos of their homes, highlighting absurd violations like mismatched curtains or slightly crooked mailboxes. I shared the footage of Eleanor's son attempting to break into my house, ensuring copies were saved on multiple devices. But the most powerful piece of evidence came from Mrs. Henderson. She revealed that she'd served on the HOA board years ago, before resigning due to disagreements with Eleanor. "She's been running this place like her own personal kingdom ever since," Mrs. Henderson explained, shaking her head. "She manipulates the rules whenever it suits her, and anyone who challenges her gets targeted." Armed with our collective evidence, we devised a strategy. Instead of confronting Eleanor directly, we decided to expose her publicly. At the upcoming annual Willow Creek Summer Festival, it was the perfect opportunity. Nearly every resident attended, and the event was designed to showcase the neighborhood's community spirit. What better stage to reveal the truth? As the festival approached, nerves ran high. I barely slept the night before, rehearsing what I would say over and over in my head. David noticed my anxiety and offered to come along for support. "You've got this," he told me, squeezing my hand reassuringly. "Just stay calm and stick to the facts." The morning of the festival arrived, bright and sunny. The green was decorated with colorful banners. Food stalls lined the pathways, and cheerful music played in the background. Neighbors mingled happily, laughing and chatting without a care in the world. To them, everything seemed normal. But for me, the air felt electric, charged with anticipation. Eleanor was already there when I arrived, standing near the stage in her signature pastel blazer, greeting attendees with practiced charm. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw me, but she quickly recovered, waving as though nothing was wrong. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I making a mistake? Could I really take on someone so entrenched in power? Then I remembered the faces of my neighbors, their frustration, their fear, their determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us reclaiming our lives. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The days following the festival felt surreal, like stepping out of a storm and into calm sunlight. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek. Neighbors who hadn't been at the event heard about it from friends or family, and soon, everyone was talking. Conversations that had once been hushed whispers behind closed doors were now loud and open, filling coffee shops, grocery store aisles, and front porches. For the first time, people weren't afraid to speak their minds. Eleanor didn't show her face for nearly a week. Rumors swirled about her packing up boxes and preparing to leave town, but when she finally reappeared, it was with a quiet resignation none of us expected. At an emergency HOA meeting called just days after the festival, she stood before a packed room of angry residents, her usual confidence replaced by visible unease. "I understand there have been concerns," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "And I want to assure you all that I've always acted in what I believed was the best interest of this community." Her words fell flat, met with cold stares and crossed arms. When someone asked why she demanded keys to private homes or find harmless decorations, she stammered, unable to provide a satisfactory answer. By the end of the meeting, it was clear. Eleanor's reign was over. She resigned quietly, slipping out of the room without another word. Her son moved out shortly afterward, leaving the house next door vacant. In her place, a new leadership team emerged, one made up of actual neighbors who cared about fairness and transparency rather than control. Mrs. Henderson became the interim president, and together, we worked to rewrite the HOA guidelines. Gone were the absurd rules about mailbox colors and flower palettes. Instead, we focused on practical matters like safety, maintenance, and fostering genuine community spirit. The change wasn't immediate, of course. Old habits die hard, and some neighbors still grumbled about letting go of the strict standards they'd grown used to. But slowly, things began to shift. Houses started reflecting their owners' personalities again. Bright shutters here, quirky garden gnomes there. Kids played freely in yards without fear of being reported for noise violations. And during holidays, the streets came alive with twinkling lights, colorful wreaths, and handmade signs that celebrated individuality. For me, the transformation was profound. My home no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like mine again. I painted my front door a cheerful shade of blue, planted yellow daisies in defiance of the old restrictions, and hung wind chimes that sang softly in the breeze. Neighbors stopped by more often, chatting over fences or inviting us to barbecues. David joked that I was becoming the unofficial mayor of Willow Creek, but I didn't mind. For the first time, I truly belonged here. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Greg wandered over with his dog, a scruffy mutt named Max who had become a neighborhood favorite despite the former ban on disruptive barking. He handed me a glass of lemonade and grinned. "You know," he said, leaning against the railing, "we couldn't have done this without you." I shook my head, smiling. It wasn't just me. We did it together. He nodded thoughtfully, scratching Max behind the ears. "Still, you were the one who stood up first. That takes guts." His words stayed with me long after he left, echoing in my mind as I gazed at the horizon. Standing up hadn't been easy. In fact, it had been terrifying. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if fighting back was worth the cost. But looking around now, at the vibrant, thriving community we'd built together, I knew it had been worth every sleepless night, every heated argument, every moment of fear. As the stars began to twinkle above, I realized something important. Standing your ground isn't just about protecting what's yours. It's about creating space for others to stand beside you. Willow Creek wasn't perfect anymore. And maybe that was the point. Imperfection gave it character, warmth, life. It made it real. And for the first time since moving here, I felt proud to call it home.